Hello everybody. My name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I am the host of Reformed GGA, and I'm very happy to present to you the first firearm that I have been able to purchase with my own money since getting sick and being able to go back to work. So this is a major accomplishment for me, and I'm happy to be at this place where I'm earning again and I can afford to get back into collecting. Now that being said, my collecting is going to have to take a little bit different tone, if you will. It used to be the case that, I thought I was healthy enough that most things wouldn't matter, and so a lot of my spare money would go into guns, but not only would it go into guns, a lot of times it would go into tinkering with guns and modifying guns, and I'd buy them one way and then a few months later it would have all different furniture and all these other add-ons and whatnot, and I frankly just really can't afford to do guns like that anymore. I need to be a little bit more conscientious, well, not a little bit. I need to be fairly conscientious about making sure that not only, that, I can maintain the hobby, but more importantly, I need to make sure that I'm providing for my health as well. And so some of my money needs to go for, kind of the rainy day fund, so that when I do have issues in the future, which seems like there's a good possibility of that now, I won't need as much help, or preferably any help. So some of my money is getting set aside for rainy day medical stuff so that I don't have the kinds of issues in the future that I had in the past. But that means that less money goes into firearms, and so I have to be much more conscientious about making sure that I get what I want up front instead of just saying, I'll modify it later. That tends to be rather expensive, and that is where this gun represents a very significant departure from my normal, but also a fairly significant departure for the company that makes it. This is a Palmetto State Armory GF4 AK, but it is one of their modernized ones. And PSA has been doing that actually quite a bit lately. They've been making specialized modernized versions of their AKs, and they've been coming in at pretty reasonable prices for most of them. This one, the base gun, was $1,050, and the amount that I've added to it has been very minimal. I did add this 1913 rail on the side of the handguard. Technically, I actually already had that available to me, but that is an addition afterwards. And I also added the magnifier and the red dot. And the rest that you see that is on the firearm was all factory. Every single thing else about it was a factory job, all for that $1,050. And of course, there's tax and shipping and handling and the FFL fee for doing the background check and all that kind of stuff. All of that's in there, but the base cost is $1,050, and you get, like I said, everything else except for the optics and this little bit of 1913 rail that I put on there for adding my weapon light, and I already own the weapon light. Everything else on it comes stock for that price, and when you think about it, that is really good. Let's consider some of these features in a little bit more detail. First of all, starting at the back end here, it has this triangle stock on it, and it looks a little uncomfortable, and frankly it is a little uncomfortable because it is very thin. But one of the reasons why people like having these on their AKs is because they fold, and when they fold very, very, very small. So that's it folded up. It's not even as wide as the gun itself is. In fact, this magnifier makes up more width than pretty much anything else that is on this thing. It folds up very nice and flush, and very flush with the back end as well. So they are really great for storage. And when you pull it out and you lock it in place, it is absolutely solid. There is absolutely no play in that thing whatsoever. This is easily the most secure folding stock, or folding brace, or whatever you want to say, that I've had on any of my guns, AKs or not. So that right there is just freaking impressive. And to get AKs that have a folding type stock on them, like I said, they're not overly comfortable, but they are very compact. That's why a lot of people like them. To get an AK that has that on there you're talking about some pretty major modifications to the receiver. These things actually have to be cut at an angle. There's parts that are drilled here, and then there's also additions to the other side, this little catch that's here. That little catch is not a standard part of an AK receiver, and so that has to be cut. And then there's an extra little piece that has to be drilled through to hold that, and the spring that's on there. That's all fairly complicated. And if you don't start out with a receiver that has those provisions, that modification right there will set you back several $100s if you don't get one out of the box that has those provisions, because you're talking about gunsmith work at that point, because you need to actually cut the receiver and weld stuff in and stuff like that. It's fairly complicated to do that, so that right out of the box is a great value. Going forward from there, it has a Magpul grip. That's not a huge upgrade, but it's definitely better than the paintbrush style grips that a lot of AKs come with. So small upgrade, but still an appreciated one. And then the trigger is also an upgrade. This is PSA's enhanced polish trigger. So it's very similar to a standard AK trigger, except that it's a little bit tighter. There isn't, well, let's go ahead and go through a trigger pull here. So fairly soft, a little bit stagey. That's because the gun's still fairly new, and so you expect that. So a little bit stagey, but still relatively light. On my trigger pull scale, it pulls at about 2 3/4 pounds, so it's fairly light. Not really a defined wall, which is typical of AKs, but there is no over travel from the point of release. Then I'll go ahead and do that held. And release, 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 release. There's a little bit of trigger slap, which is kind of just an AK thing. You get used to it. But past the point of reset, there's no other over travel in the other direction either. So it has been smoothed out, and the travel distance has been limited just to what is necessary. So that is a good upgrade for the trigger. Getting a new trigger on your own, usually, especially if you want an actual upgraded trigger, it's usually going to be at least $40, if not maybe $60, $65. Some of the upgraded triggers that I've seen out there will cost well more than $100, sometimes getting over $200 for a trigger, and granted, some of those triggers are really, really, really nice. But on AKs, you usually don't need something that fancy. And I think that this one right here actually strikes a pretty good balance all the way around. It's everything that you do want in a standard trigger, a fairly long length of pull, and it's not super uber duper light so that you're not going to accidentally set it off. A little bit longer pull, a little bit heavier, so you don't accidentally set it off when you don't mean to, but it's still lighter than most of the standard head triggers, and it's still a little bit shorter pull than most of the standard triggers, so it's a good happy medium kind of trigger. And like I said, usually for something like that, you're going to start off with at least an extra $40, provided you do the work of installing it yourself. If you don't do the work of installing it yourself, that's just all that much more money. Then on top of that, and this is something that PSA has actually done a lot of, they've been putting their enhanced safeties on their guns. And the nice thing about the enhanced safety is that you can use your index finger to bring the safety down and bring it up, so I don't actually have to break my grip anymore and move it. That's always a good thing to have. I think that the PSA enhanced safety leaves a little bit to be desired. It doesn't come out from the gun quite as far as I would like, and it's also set right on that angle, and I like the other ones that come down a little bit, but that's more of a personal preference thing. But still, if you were to get this separately, the cheap ones like PSA uses, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense, but it is a simpler design than some of the other ones. The low-end ones with the enhanced little tab there are usually at least $25, and a lot of the other ones that are out there that have a little bit more substantial selector switch on them, they usually start at least at $40, and some of them, go up past $60. So that's money saved there. And then the dust cover is interesting because it is railed, and I'm going to take off the magnifier here so that I can show you the rail a little bit better. But yeah, that dust cover is railed, and railed dust covers sometimes have problems holding zero. and I haven't been able to shoot this thing out at the distances I would like. I've only taken this on one shooting outing, and that was to a place with only a 25-yard range that was available to me. So I haven't really tested this thing at distance to see how well it holds zero or not yet, so the jury's still out on that one. But it nonetheless is true that getting a 1913 desk cover for your AK is a bit of a pain. For one thing, not all AKs are the same size, so you need to get one that's properly sized, and then just general availability can be a bit of an issue. And of course they have to be installed, and they install different ways. This one basically installs where the rear sight on the open iron sights would be, and so that would take a little bit of work to install that there, but of course PSA already did this at the factory, so you don't have to worry about it. On top of that, they also put a little peep sight on the back of this 1913 rail dust cover, so that your sighting system is basically more like a standard AR-15. Some people really like. I don't really like iron sights to begin with, but it is interesting that they went with that, because that peep sight a lot of people do find more useful. And what is interesting about the height of it, if you use a 1/3 co-witness red dot, you will actually have plenty of space as long as you get an open mount like this one is. This one is an open mount, and the magnifier has an open space underneath it as well. It works out such that even with those optics installed, I can actually still see through the peep and see the front post. So I can still use the iron sights on this gun even with the optics installed, which is cool. Like I said, have yet to really use it at range to see what is going on there. But just having it there is something that saves the end user time and money in trying to find this thing, make sure that it's the right size, and of course getting it attached and fit and all those kinds of things. That's money saved, money earned. And then at the front end here, you have a handguard that goes all the way up to the gas block. Most of the AKs, they stop here, and back is usually where the handguard stops, but this one goes all the way to the front. Now, they did leave the front of the gas tube exposed, so you don't want to wrap your hand around that, because that'll get pretty hot, but you can still do a bottom style grip and be able to keep your hand away from the barrel, so that is a good provision. And then this handguard is also very solid. It is a JL Billet handguard, and the nice thing about these things is that they actually maintain zero. So if you want to, provided that they're installed properly, and this one appears to be, that's another thing with PSA. Sometimes their installation is a little, and so it's always good to check, before you put anything on it, and make sure that everything's nice and tight and secure, and this one is. And so if I wanted to, I could mount, lasers on it, IR designators on it, something that requires it to hold zero, and it would hold zero just fine. I will say though that there's two aspects of this that I don't like. One of them has to do with JL Billet, and then the other one has to do with PSA. For the one that is a problem from JL Billet is that the upper handguard that sits over the gas tube, there's one cutout in it on both sides that is very large. That cutout right there is a very, 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 very large cutout, and depending on how you're holding that handguard, a finger can slip inside of that hole and you can burn yourself on the gas tube pretty easily, so that's not so pleasant. I wish that JL Billets would put a little cross piece over that large opening so that you can't get fingers inside there. That would be a good thing. So that's the problem from JL Billets. The other one problem that I have is a PSA problem, and it's a pretty common problem with PSA. It's not on all of their AKs that I've had, but on most of the AKs that I've had, their gas tubes are way too freaking tight. Now with the JL Billet system on there, it's supposed to be tight because that's how it maintains zero. It's really, really, really tight lockup. But it's too tight even at that, because even with the JL Billet handguard on there, you should still be able to take on and off the gas tube. It should be very tight, but you should still be able to do it. In my case, I was able to get it off, but I wasn't able to get it back on. And I even took off the upper piece of the handguard to see if just the tube by itself, free of any interference from the handguard, would be able to go in properly, and it didn't. So I wound up, like I do with a lot of the PSA AKs, I wound up having to file some parts on it so that I could actually get it to slide in place. And I did that just barely because I still wanted it to be tight, okay, because you don't want to lose the advantage of having the JL billet handguard there. So I still left it fairly tight, but I put it at a point where I could actually get the thing back on. And still very disappointed that PSA has still not figured this out. I think of all of the AKs that I've owned from PSA in the various configurations and styles, I think I've only had one that actually had good gas tube lockup from the beginning, which is pretty sad. That being said, everything else about the gun seems really solid, so I'm willing to overlook that one. And they were probably thinking, you know, once you put on a handguard like this, a lot of people are simply not going to take off the gas tube anymore, and so it's not a big issue if it's a little tight. Okay, but you're still technically supposed to be able to remove the gas tube. Yeah, okay. Enough beating the dead horse on that one. So you've got this really awesome handrail up here, but like I said, holds 0, which is fantastic. And then going up from there, this barrel has actually been shortened a little bit. This is not a standard 16.3 inch AK barrel. This one instead is a 14.7. Getting a barrel shortened like that a lot of times is something that you would need to go to a gunsmith for, and they would charge you a very decent amount of money to resize your barrel. This one comes stock with a slightly shortened barrel. And the reason why I personally like the shortened barrel, there's lots of different reasons that people do it, but the reason why I like the shortened barrel is because with this handguard, I personally think that the shorter barrel looks a little bit better, because otherwise you'd have this kind of long spindly thing hanging out there in space, and it looks just a little odd to me. That's more of an aesthetic thing, but it's one of the things that I would consider with a handguard like this anyways, and the fact that they already brought it in from the factory to make it look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing is not something that I'm going to argue with. They do have a version of this on the website that does not have the shortened barrel, that is a little bit cheaper, but like I said, the money that you would spend one way or the other, it's a lot cheaper to have PSA do it than to go and get a gunsmith to do it, because I think the price between this version with the semi-shortened barrel and the standard length barrel was only like $50. And if you go to a gunsmith, a lot of them, to cut on a barrel like that, you're probably looking at more like $100 or $200 in some cases, depending on what all you want done. But the PSA, having them do it, is a whole lot cheaper. And so the barrel has been shortened, and then because the barrel was shortened, there's certain things in the US that happen with our laws, because our laws state that a true rifle has to be over 16 inches as far as the barrel length is concerned in order for it to be classified as a rifle and bought and sold as a rifle. Well, this one doesn't. Like I said, it has a little bit shorter barrel than that. And so to get it back into the legal category of being a legal rifle, which is the legal category that everybody likes because it's the category with the least restrictions, basically, it's actually easier to get a full-size rifle in America than it is to get a little handgun in terms of legalities and requirements and things like that. Our weapon laws are just strange, but that's the way that it is. And it's not, well, I can't say that it's too strange, because lots of other countries also have barrel length requirements as well. And lots of places in Europe that allow civilians to have semi-auto rifles, a lot of them will require something that's closer to 18 inches. I think Canada is also does an 18-inch requirement as well. So I guess America is not entirely odd in having a length requirement. But in terms of what it does for the gun or not, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But in any case, the barrel would technically be too short, and so what PSA did is they actually pinned and welded this muzzle device on. And if you pin and weld it, that legally in America makes it a part of the barrel, and so it's not detachable anymore because it's been pinned and welded, and so it actually counts as a part of the barrel length. And so now we're back up to 16.3 inches, So I brought it back in primarily for aesthetic reasons. There are other reasons why people will do a shortened barrel style like this. This is actually really common with ARs, for example. Lots of people like to clone the M4 that the military uses, and the military uses a 14.5-inch barrel on their M4s. Like I said, in America, the legal minimum for the barrel length is supposed to be 16, and so there's about 1.5 inch difference there. And so for people to take their clones of the M4 and still meet the legal requirements of a rifle, they'll take the muzzle device and they're just pin and weld that on so that legally becomes part of the barrel. And now I have a 14.5-inch barrel, legally speaking, but it is clone correct to an M4. So I'm not the only one who does this. I'm not the only weirdo out there. I'm just the one who does it for an entirely different reason. I'm not trying to clone any gun that's actually out there in military use. I just happen to think it looks a little better. And then this muzzle device that they've pinned and welded on there, not only would you have to pay for the pinning and welding separately, but this muzzle device is a JMAC compensator. These things are not cheap. If you go and get one of these separately, you're usually talking at least $40 for something that's halfway decent, and you can easily spend well over $100 on a muzzle device very easily. So, you know, there's a good $100 there. These rails, these JL Billet rails separately would be like $200 to $250 that you'd be paying for. An enhanced safety for the cheap ones, at least 25 bucks, but a lot of them start at like $40 and up. The dust covers, you can get a lot of variation in prices on them depending on how well you want them to hold zero. But anything that's going to be at least decent is definitely going to be at least 50 bucks or more. And not all of them are going to come with provision for actually moving the sight back. Now, this isn't an overly complicated piece. It's just a little diopter that has an Allen screw that attaches it to the rear rail. But a lot of times parts like that will still cost at least, 15, 20 bucks. And then, like I mentioned before, starting out with a receiver that's made for the folding stocks, and then a upgraded trigger. It's not super fancy, but it is an upgraded trigger. That's at least another $40 right there. Having the proper receiver for the stock, that's probably, well, if you were to convert a regular receiver after the fact with a gunsmith, that's probably at least $150, if not $200 right there. So you save at least half of $1,000 having PSA come out with all those features. So yeah, in terms of economy of getting the most bang for your buck, these modernized AKs that PSA is putting out are definitely worth a look. To me, the real test to see if it will really fit the role of a true modernized AK is going to be that dust cover. Because if this dust cover works and it actually holds zero, or at least well enough to make the gun viable out to 300 yards on a reasonably small target, we'll say 8 to 12 inch plate, if you can hit an 8 to 10 inch, well, 8 to 10 inch would be more ideal, but we'll be generous and say 12 because I have a 12 inch plate. If you can still hit a 12 inch plate at 200 or 300 yards, that's at least, minute of bad guy viable, and it makes, getting something like this worthwhile in terms of it working well enough. Like I said, I have had issues with these rail dust covers in the past, so we'll see, and I was definitely not able to take it out to any great range when I shot this thing. But so that part of it is still waiting, but all of the other add-on features are excellent for the price that you pay. And on top of that, I didn't even have to do my usual polishing that I do with the AKs from PSA. A lot of times the action is not very smooth, and so I have to go in and I have to file a bunch of things down to make sure that I don't get malfunctions when I'm out shooting. This one, though, it comes smooth. I didn't see any reason to modify it, and I haven't put a ton of rounds through this thing, just a few magazines, but it worked without having to modify any of the internals at all. And this is a fundamentally different gun than my previous ones. The bolt carrier has different dimensions than my other bolt carriers and my other PSA AKs. The bolt also has different dimensions, and the firing pin has different dimensions. And of course the receiver itself is a different receiver. So this one does not function like a lot of my previous PSAs, and so far that seems to be a good thing. Like I said, I'm a little disappointed in the gas tube. Like I said, it's supposed to be tight with the JL billet rail, but it's not supposed to be impossible. Because like I said, I even took off the upper handguard and it still didn't work. Not supposed to be quite that tight. You're still supposed to be able to take it on and off. Alright, so that's a little bit disappointing. But that's the only thing that I can really say is disappointing at this point. Like I said, we'll see how the dust cover works with the optics on there once we're able to get it out to a little bit greater range. But so far, it's looking pretty solid. It's got all the right things. And like I said, for a price of $1,050, that's not counting the optics, that's not counting the 1913 rail I put on the handguard. But $1,050 for all those upgrades, if you were to take a rifle and get all those extra parts yourself and do all the work or have it done for you by a gunsmith, there's no way you'd be able to do it for that price. So for trying to get the most bang out of your buck, as it were, this is a gun that if you were to kit it out yourself would easily be a $1,500 plus gun before adding optics. That's pretty freaking amazing. Now, in terms of weight, because some of you guys will be interested in that, in terms of weight, when this thing, with these optics and a Valkyrie PL Pro, I believe it is, weapon light on it, and a 30-round magazine in it that is fully loaded, it weighs just a little over 10 pounds. It's like 10 pounds, 2.7 ounces, something like that. So a little over 10 pounds when it's fully kitted out, which is not uncommon for AKs. A lot of AKs, when you get a fully loaded magazine in them, and optics, and your weapon light, and all those kinds of things, they usually wind up somewhere between 9.5 and 10.5 pounds. So this is pretty much right in the middle of that. So it's not significantly different that way. And then I also did want to mention, before I close this thing out, that PSA also sent one of their magazines with the gun. For the longest time, they were just sending out the Magpul AK magazines, which work fine. I wouldn't call them true duty use magazines, but they work just fine at the range. Magpul does make some reinforced versions of these magazines that have metal locking tabs front and rear. And those ones are nice, and I consider those to be suitable for serious use. But a lot of times they would just ship out with these cheap ones that are not reinforced at all. But now it seems that PSA is going to their own magazine, and what's cool about their own magazine that they send out with them is that they are reinforced. That is, the lug on the back is actually a metal lug. On the front you have metal reinforcement, and the lips, which is not the case with the Magpul magazines, but the feed lips are also metal reinforced on these magazines. And I haven't really used these a ton, but when I went shooting with these yesterday, I didn't have any hiccups or any problems with it. It does fit just a little loose in the gun. So there's a little bit of side to side, there's a little bit of front to back. But with the way AKs are designed, they're designed to work with relatively loose tolerances, and so it didn't cause any problems impeding or anything like that. The Magpul magazines definitely do fit tighter. There's still a little bit of play, but not as much, and the side-to-side is not nearly as big of an issue. And then, of course, when I'm working from the bench, I like these little shorties. This is just a 10-rounder from Magpul. And that's pretty solid as well. But like I said, PSA is now doing their own magazines, and so far I am quite happy with them. They seem to function reliably so far. Like I said, I haven't done any major testing, just a few magazines through the gun, and I haven't taken it out to distance yet, so we'll have to see how that goes. But so far it's got wonderful features. I didn't have to modify the internals at all, unlike my other PSA guns. And the only real complaint that I have so far is that the gas tube was on way too tight. It's annoying, but in the broad realm of what could go wrong, it's not that bad. Alright, so in the future we're looking to see if that desk cover is actually capable of holding 0, or at least holding enough of a 0 to be viable and repeatable out to say 200 or 300 yards, so we'll be looking out for that. And we'll also need to, because I didn't do it when I was out, we'll also need to get the iron sights sighted in and see how that works with having that line of sight that is underneath the optics. Because like I said, the optics are hollow underneath, so I can actually see through the peephole all the way out to the front post, and so I want to see how that works as well. So yeah, looking to see if it holds 0, looking to see just how the standard iron sights work with the little peep at the back. But every other thing, and of course there's the ongoing endurance and reliability kind of thing. But otherwise, it looks like it's pretty much ready to go. Alright, so with that said, thank you all very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, please go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know Him, the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.